Hello everyone, I'm Max. So today we're getting ready to have another crack at a From the Depths campaign. This is something I've tried to do many times before. It usually falls apart rather quickly because my ships are far too expensive to build. This is something that we're going to try and fix today. So the goal for this ship is I want a fast, unarmoured ship which costs less than 15,000 material and can function reasonably on its own without resupply for an extended period of time. For my fleet I want to operate under tiers of ships, that's why the cost cap comes into play. Sub 15,000 I'm classifying as a patrol boat, sub 60,000 a destroyer, and below 100,000 a light cruiser. This should allow me to always be able to construct new ships easily. Saying that, it is important for me to ensure that none of my ships become completely obsolete, at least until we've defeated a few factions, assuming we get that far. So I wanted to ensure that this patrol boat would have an anti-capital weapon, as well as a weapon to engage ships of its own class. This is mostly because these ships take a long time to build. I mean, this is a tiny little patrol boat and this has cost me about 45 minutes of my time to hammer out. So it would certainly be unfortunate if a larger ship was to become obsolete. I suppose it doesn't really matter so much for this one, but I figure it's better to get in the habit now. As I construct the hull, there's nothing super special I like to touch on. It's a rather simple design, which doesn't produce the most stable ship. Keeping well within the cost cap meant that I wanted to use only wood and stone for the actual hull, therefore this boat has no armour per se. This wasn't much of a concern for me as the total cost turned out to be around 9,000 material, which is essentially a throwaway ship. This of course means that a single well-placed cram cannon shell could potentially destroy the entire ship. But once again, we weren't really too worried about that. I feel like this is a good place to complain a little bit about From the Depths, removing fuel and ammo. It really makes the game feel a lot worse when I'm placing fuel tanks, not to actually store the fuel, but to siphon materials off to burn in the engine, which is literally what the steam engine does. I don't really care about the ammo, like the ammo is whatever, but I really think that fuel was a integral part. Speaking of the engine was complete overkill to be honest. It never used anywhere close to the amount of power that it produced. Looking back at it now, a single fuel injector engine probably could have done the trick. However, I decided to leave it in under the assumption that at some point I may want to come back and upgrade this boat, which, let's be honest, I'm never going to because it's a tiny little patrol boat, but there's definitely some space left in the hull if I needed to place something else into it. The central command tower is completely irrelevant to the functioning of the ship. Honestly, putting a simple weapon in its place probably would have been the better use of the space. But quite frankly, I like the command center. Not that it's any use, because there's no chair in it, and it's a small boat with an unstable hull, so it rocks a bit. The hardest bit of the entire build for me was the superstructure, mostly because I struggle to make my ships look good in the best of times, and then having to strap AI components to them is difficult, so it was a challenge. Still, I think the superstructure that we ended up with looks good enough that I'm going to leave it. Conversely to how you would usually build a ship, the rear weapon is the main anti-capital weapon on this ship. I decided on a torpedo, which is perhaps not the best weapon, mostly because we're dealing with a lot of surface and aircraft as, you know, the deep water guard. And obviously a torpedo is only good against one of those, and there aren't really any submarines around for a long time. But I decided on a torpedo because I wanted to go for like a World War II style, and obviously World War II missiles don't really make sense. Plus I don't really like the look of a massive missile barrage. I just think that it doesn't have the same appeal as a massive cram cannon volley, you know. Cram cannons kind of seem a little bit more devastating. But obviously we can't put a cram cannon on this patrol boat, so I decided on torpedoes. In order to protect the ship against air attack, we have 4 12.7mm anti-air guns, which to be honest are more for decoration than anything else. We also have a small secondaries battery on the front there, which is a anti-aircraft gun which I loaded with anti-ship shells, which doesn't really make any sense whatsoever, and is certainly not efficient. But it was simple, it was easy, and it's not the main weapon, so that's what I put. Still, it's loaded with AP, HE, and fragmentation shells with a penetration depth fuse, so it's not going to be good against aircraft because I suspect it will go straight through them. but it should be efficient at destroying ships of the same size as the patrol boat, which is kind of what we want. And as long as we're shooting down the balloons, because most from the deep water guard flying things use balloons to fly, as long as we're hitting those and we're getting them into the water, then we can hit them with the torpedoes, and that should do all the damage that we need to do. When I tested it in combat, the ship performed admirably against closely priced ships, which you would expect. I mean, we're going to be playing on hard, so I'm not expecting, you know, to be completely trashing the AI, but I have no illusions that it could take on anything that costs more than 20,000. I think even 15,000 would probably be a stretch. You know, it's only 9,000, so it's quite small, and a single hit is going to knock it out, and it's not exactly fast. I think its top speed is like 11 meters per second, because it keeps like sort of slamming down on the water, I guess. It doesn't like sail in a straight line. Again, that's mostly due to the unstable hull, but I knew that when I was building it. The best way would be to have a much deeper keel, but I didn't want to redo my entire hull design to add a deep keel. And well, honestly, it's just a tiny little patrol boat, so 11 meters per second is probably fine. Its main weakness is definitely going to be aircraft. This is something I'll have to keep in mind, but I've already made the light frigate. You just haven't light cruiser. You just haven't seen it yet. And the light cruiser is very much. It's got 8 anti-aircraft batteries on it, so I feel like in a fleet, the light cruiser should be able to protect the patrol boats from most aircraft which are in the game. So I feel pretty confident that we're not going to have a problem with that. But then again, we also need to keep in mind that we're making a fleet here, not just one boat. This is not a be-all end-all, so it's okay if we don't have the strongest anti-aircraft capabilities on this ship. So without further ado, and without any more words from me, I present to you the Decisive class patrol boat.